Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today will be the continuation of Burn Your Wings. This will be Part 11, Chapter 11, entitled The Naming of a Star. They're given the 2 days following the sports festival off from school, and Shoto decides to take this opportunity to go see his mother for the first time in years. Midoriya had changed his view, well, actually, more like his entire world, to be honest. But it's not enough for Shoto to find peace alone. In a way, he's thankful that he didn't have any more matches after Midoriya. He isn't sure that he would have been able to think clearly, much less use his left side at all. No, for Shoto to fully accept his fire, he needs to talk to his mother first. He knows that. He's made his decision. He's already dressed and packed and ready to make the journey to the hospital she's in. That's not why he's hesitating and stalling, though. The thing is, Shoto has his cell phone out. The screen shows the open messaging app with Midoriya's number as the recipient, thanks to that incident after the USJ where everyone in class exchanged their numbers. He's been staring at the blinking cursor for the past 10 minutes. The screen had actually turned off in the middle because of his inactivity. It was startling him, and Shoto had to hastily turn his phone back on. But he still hasn't been able to type anything, much less send anything to Midoriya. He wants to, that's for sure, but he has no idea what. Or how. It's strange, this instant. Shoto doesn't understand what to call it. Closeness, intimacy, understanding, kinship, a bond, yearning, even dependency might work. Whatever it is, it binds him and draws him to Midoriya. He can't help but gravitate towards the boy, wanting to be closer, wanting to know more, wanting to call him Izuku. Except when they had talked briefly after the awarding ceremony, Midoriya had called him Todoroki. Todoroki, Shoto had repeated slowly. Everything that had been simmering on the tip of his tongue was forgotten. Not Shoto. Midoriya had given him an apologetic smile. I kind of blew propriety in the heat of the moment during the match, and that thing with Endeavor was, well, that wasn't polite of me, I'm sorry. And he had honestly, genuinely looked sorry. He had been careful and considerate, and as if he was blaming himself for raging at Shoto earlier during their match and trying to make up for it by not overwhelming him again. As if he'd overstepped some boundary that he normally wouldn't have. As if he didn't want to pressure him. As if he were backing away to give him space. As if he hadn't already gone and shattered Shoto's world and rebuilt it with his bare hands. Shoto had wanted to tell him that it was all right, that it was refreshing to not be called as Todoroki, his father's name, and that it had brought back the memory of how his mother would call him Shoto in her soft, warm voice. That the way that Midoriya said his name overlapped with that treasured memory, that he appreciated it, that he wanted it, that he wanted to call him Izuku, too. But he didn't know how to say that. He didn't know if he should, if he even could. Midoriya wasn't even on a first-name basis with Uraraka and Iida, his friends, after all, so what right did Shoto have? Shoto didn't know, as he's never really done proper social interactions, and he really didn't want to mess this up. So he had just nodded numbly at Midoriya's considerate, and yet unneeded and unwanted, courtesy. But that doesn't mean he's able to go back to before that he knew Midoriya like this. They had something right after their match, but yesterday feels like ages ago, and now Shoto isn't sure anymore. Perhaps all Midoriya had wanted was to help Shoto break through his shackles, and maybe some of his own too. But Shoto finds himself clinging to any sliver of hope that the kinship he'd felt between them hadn't just been temporary, that it might last longer, that it could be more. Hence, here he is now, staring blankly at the cursor of his messaging app, and as it blinks back mockingly at him, determined to reach out, but still without the foggiest clue on how. But then, a message pops up in the previously empty chat log, and Shoto jumps in surprise and panic. His hand spasms and he almost drops the phone. For a wild moment he thinks that he might have accidentally sent something, but no. The message flashing on his screen clearly reads that it's from Midoriya. It's from Midoriya. Midoriya texted him. Shoto manages to squeeze in a split second of relief, panic, wonder, and elation before his phone pings repeatedly and more messages appear one after the other in short succession. It's just enough to shake him out of his daze and actually read what Midoriya sent him. Oh my God. What? How? Why? Link attached. The rapid succession of short messages does nothing to relieve Shoto's confusion. Perplexed, he taps on the link only to find a news clip of Midoriya, which in itself is nothing surprising, seeing as he simply just won the sports festival, but absolutely took it by storm as well. Shoto is distracted by the photo emblazoned at the top, Midoriya with his wings of flame spread wide behind him, like an ethereal angel, his right arm outstretched with gusts of wind from his super strength, blowing strands of dark curly hair out of his bun, grinning sharply as the light of the fire throws his face into sharp relief and casts his normally soft and kind features in deep shadows and brilliant highlights, and his green eyes burning with light. Before he finally drags his eyes down to read the headlines, he chokes. Midoriya Izuku, super strength and fire, the secret love child of all might and endeavor. And as Midoriya had said, what? How? Why? Oh my God. After having seen Midoriya break down hysterically at the question of whether All Might is his father, how much issue he has with his own father, and how absolutely vicious he'd been to Endeavor, Shoto can practically see the utter horror that must be on Midoriya's face at the joking headlines. And despite the uncertainty and the doubt that had been gnawing at Shoto, all of that fails and falls away as he inexplicably feels so light at the fact that Midoriya has chosen to reach out first and share this little joke with him. Midoriya may not call him Shoto anymore, and Shoto himself definitely can't call him Izuku, but maybe someday they will. Shoto looks at the joking headlines again, and a small huff leaves his mouth unbidden, surprising even Shoto himself. It's the closest he's been to laughing in years. So when Shoto stands at the front of the classroom 2 days later, he's no longer plagued with doubt and uncertainty. He doesn't quite smile, but he relishes in the feeling that Midoriya's green eyes are on him as he announces his temporary hero name, Shoto. Izuku looks down at the sizable stack of hero agencies that have drafted him. He's managed to gain the most nominations, with Bakugo as a close second. Huh, I'd expect it to be more overwhelming. Midoriya won, after all, Kaminari had commented. Perhaps the fact that his quirk is self-destructive brought down the numbers? Yaoyorozu had mused. It's still in the thousands. I have 0, Ashido whined, while flopping down on her desk, though she still had a good-natured wave sent Izuku's way and an apologetic look with a smile. He's going to have to categorize them by type, and within those categories create subsets according to the number of incidents resolved with experience, and he shouldn't forget their ranking, even if he'll probably look more into their skill set relative to what Izuku needs the most help with. And wow, this is going to be so much research. Izuku notices from his peripherals that quite a few of his classmates are looking at him and muttering away with indulgent smiles on their faces, and self-consciously clicks his mouth shut with a sheepish grin. Instead of running his mouth again, he turns his eyes to the list in front of him and scans the first page to get a better idea of where to start, and promptly freezes at one of the names that stare back at him. He looks down at the name for a long moment. Finally, he jerks his eyes away from the page. Izuku turns his head to look around at Todoroki's seat, which is roughly diagonally behind him. Perhaps that inexplicable link between them is still there because, even though Izuku hasn't even opened his mouth, Todoroki somehow still looks up almost instantly to meet his eyes, as if he was drawn by the same force. The other boy must see something in Izuku's gaze, because he gets up from his chair and comes over without a word. "Did you need something?" Todoroki asked softly, settling into the empty seat beside Izuku that was once Minetta's, and Izuku turns around to straddle his chair and face Todoroki properly. "Advice, I guess," Izuku starts hesitantly. "And to let you know, I feel like I should ask your, well, not exactly permission, but opinion, at the very least. I thought you might want to know about this." And while the classroom is noisy enough, with their classmates talking animatedly with each other about which hero agencies they're thinking about going to, Izuku decides not to risk something as sensitive as this. He would know better than anyone, after all. So instead of saying the name out loud, he smooths the first page of the agencies that nominated him on the table between them. Todoroki looks at the name Izuku's finger is pointing at, face carefully impassive as he blinks slowly. Then he brings out a sheet from his own, fairly thick, especially considering he's only made it to the second round of the tournament. Stack of nominations. He places it right next to Izuku's form, this time facing Izuku, and points to the exact same name that's on both sheets of paper. Endeavor Hero Agency. They're both silent for a moment. I hadn't thought I'd made an exactly good impression, Izuku murmurs, for lack of anything else contributional to say. Todoroki hums in response, the corners of his lips quirking up almost imperceptibly, as he recalls fondly how utterly outraged the man had been when he looked at Izuku, as he deliberately burned him with his sass and his sharp, sharp grin. Hero agencies can nominate 2 students each, Todoroki starts slowly. I guess I expected him to nominate me, but as for you... He was surprisingly quiet the past 2 days, come to think of it, like he was thinking over something, or someone. Todoroki then lifts his eyes to meet Izuku's. My guess is he was impressed enough by your performance and your victory to want you. Even though you two had an incident, he still values competence over anything else, and as you pointed out, you also have a fire quirk, so that might have heightened his interest as well. Huh, is all Izuku manages. He doesn't really know how he feels, or how he even should feel, about what Todoroki is implying, though he doesn't know the man that well outside of his hero career. Considering how Hisashi had been, the fact that Endeavor is willing to put aside whatever minor offense that Izuku dealt with is mind-blowing on his own. I think, Todoroki begins hesitantly, low enough for his voice not to carry to anyone other than Izuku. I think I'll accept it. Izuku's eyes fly to Todoroki's. Mismatched eyes stare at Endeavor's name for a moment longer before they flicker up to hold Izuku's gaze calmly. I already told you over text, but I want to meet with my mother. She apologized to me and in turn forgave me surprisingly easily, and told me while smiling that me not being held back by anything, that is what would make her happy, what would save her. It's thanks to those words, it's thanks to you, that I'm considering this now. Before I wouldn't even have thought about going to him, and it's not like I've forgiven or forgotten what he's done, but it's still true that he's the number 2 hero, even if I don't like that fact. It's time for me to accept and experience that with my own 2 eyes. Unlike him, now I can do it. Todoroki takes in a breath and quirks a small, almost imperceptible smile at Izuku. We are not our fathers, after all. Izuku stares at Todoroki with something akin to awe. Both of them know that while their situations are similar, they aren't the same, and Endeavor is not Hisashi in so many ways, but what Todoroki has found in himself to do, Izuku doesn't know if he would be able to do that. You really are amazing, Izuku says honestly, completely sincere and without a hint of embarrassment. Todoroki's cheeks flush. How can you keep with that sincere face? He drops his face into his palms with a groan. Izuku blinks in confusion. Todoroki? But Todoroki doesn't even acknowledge Izuku's call and stubbornly avoids looking at Izuku again. He doesn't seem to be planning on leaving the confines of his palms for the time being, so Izuku just shrugs and leaves him to it. Instead, he looks over the 2 sheets of paper lying between them. Endeavor. Izuku taps a finger against the name and ponders. As much as he hates the parallels of his and Todoroki's backstories, like he said, Endeavor is not Hisashi, and Todoroki has already made the decision to learn under the number 2. And while Izuku has never liked Endeavor, and likes him even less now, that doesn't change what he's accomplished as a hero, or how much Izuku had looked up to him as someone who uses hot fire for heroism and not villainy. Izuku had already began thinking that he needs to figure out how to refine and train the fire part of his quirk after all. No matter what he's done, just like Todoroki pointed out, it's still true that Endeavor is the highest-ranked hero with a fire quirk. If Todoroki can put aside his issues with Endeavor, perhaps Izuku can scrounge up the nerve to face the man, and everything he represents, as well. Maybe I'll join you, he ends up murmuring. Todoroki lifts his face from his hands at that. He meets Izuku's eyes. To anyone else, his face may look blank, but Izuku can see the small yet hopeful smile that curves his lips and softens his eyes. I look forward to it. But when All Might tells Izuku that the reclusive hero called Gran Torino had nominated him, well, all other options get abruptly and violently thrown out the window. It's that mentor of his mentor. Izuku can't really say no to that, no matter how much All Might had worryingly shaken like a leaf when remembering said mentor, or how much Todoroki had looked subtly disappointed, or how much Iida's smile had lost its shine. Not that there's really anything Izuku can do about that, though not for his lack of concern or effort. Iida had left the sports festival early due to family issues, not participating in the award ceremony to receive the bronze medal that he had won alongside Tokuyami. The news had broken the next day. The turbo hero Ingenium, though Izuku and Uraraka know him better as Iida's older brother, that he's so proud of, Iida Tensei, had been assaulted by the hero killer Stain. Fortunately, he had managed to escape with his life. Unfortunately, he had been injured so badly that his life as a hero may come to an end. Once school had started after this short break, contrary to concern that Iida had been lively, almost more so than normal, and in that turn it worried Izuku, because there was almost a desperate tinge in the strain for normalcy, so Izuku and Uraraka had respected his wishes and not pride, opting to swallow their questions and signs of concern for the sake of keeping up the nonchalant yet crumbling front that Iida was putting up. But during the week-long internship, Iida will be without Izuku and Uraraka to act as his buffers between himself and the curious if well-intentioned world. He'll be in Hosu, the city where his older brother lost his life as a hero. And while Izuku tentatively assumes that, like Todoroki, Iida is also facing his demons and taking up the mantle of Hosu's protector that his brother had worn, he's still concerned. So when Class 1A gathers at the train station to leave for each of their internships, Izuku reaches out. Iida tenses. Uraraka comes to stand beside Izuku. None of them had said it out loud, but there was an unspoken understanding that Izuku and Uraraka were giving him space. Iida appreciates it fiercely, but even if he can feel the cautious break of status quo in Izuku's voice and acknowledge that it was a long time coming, so when he turns to face his two best friends, Iida is smiling, but, "Yes, Midoriya?" Izuku gazes up at the paper-thin and weary smile for a moment longer. He knows that smile. He knows what a forced smile looks like. But instead of asking if Iida's all right, of course he isn't, or insisting that he talks to them, it doesn't have to be to them, Izuku meets Iida's eyes squarely. "You told me before that you want to be someone that I can rely on. I do rely on you. I always did. So, Iida, I'm going to count on you to tell us when you need us. We'll be there." Iida's eyes widen. Whatever he was expecting, it was something along the lines of the worried queries or the unreliable assurances or the repetitive condolences that had set Iida's teeth on edge for the past few days. He certainly wasn't expecting Izuku to fully put his faith in him and quietly offer support while not pressuring him as well. But Izuku understands that sometimes, when the world feels like it's crumbling around you, soft words are not what you need. Sometimes being treated like glass only makes you feel more brittle. Sometimes what you need is a sense of control. So he's giving that to Iida, and Uraraka, taking subtle hints from Izuku, has followed his lead. If Iida needs space, they'll give it to him. If Iida needs them, they'll be there for him. Iida's voice wavers, his mask of a smile starts faltering. Uraraka puts a hand on his arm in support. For a moment it looks like Iida's about to give in and let out what he'd kept bottled up, but then the moment passes and his face closes off again. "I won't let you down," Iida says, instead while plastering that forced smile back on his face. And with that he turns around and leaves towards his train. Despite his unhurried pace, for some reason it looks like he's fleeing from them. Izuku follows Iida's retreating back for a long moment before he's able to turn around and wish Uraraka luck, say his goodbyes to his classmates, and send a wave to Todoroki when he notices the other boy gazing in their direction, and catches his own train. Izuku knows firsthand that sometimes words of comfort or best intentions just don't cut it, after all. Some things you just don't want to bear with others, you want to bear on your own, so he'll respect Iida's space and trust him to let them know when and what he needs. With that thought, Izuku does his best to focus on his own internship. If this Gran Torino is someone who can make All Might shake like a leaf just by thinking about him, Izuku better be prepared for anything. Like this ludicrously shabby building the address leads him to. Izuku eyes it shrewdly before knocking on the door. "Hello? Is anyone home?" No one answers the door. But you see, Izuku prides himself on his situational awareness and his ability to sense human presence, and he's absolutely positive that he just heard the tiniest sound smother itself as soon as he knocked on the door. Someone is inside, but are they not answering him because they won't or because they can't? Izuku tries knocking again. "This is Midoriya Izuku from UA. I heard you nominated me for the internship, but is everything all right?" Still no answer. Izuku's brow creases. "Excuse me," he says, in a warning before he tries the door, It's unlocked, to his surprise, and it swings open wide, giving him a clear view of the inside of the building without actually having to step inside. What greets him is the sight of what looks like a dead body. Blood is splattered all over the floor. A small elderly figure is sprawled face down in that slowly growing puddle. And is that his intestines spilled in the blood? And over this gruesome sight overlaps others, All Might choking out blood and violent coughs as they rack his body. Aizawa, broken and mangled, pinned under the monstrous Nomu in a pool of his own blood, his face bashed into the ground with a sickening crack. Inko curled into a ball on the floor, trembling with silent sobs, as she clutches her hands to her mouth in a desperate attempt not to irritate Hizashi any further. Izuku can't breathe, but he can move. In a flash, he's dropped the case that holds his newly repaired hero suit and pulled himself across the room. He drops to his knees by the old man's side before the case even hits the ground, not caring about how harshly his knees bang on the floor. His mind is blank, and his breath is short, and his hands are shaking as they feel for a pulse. Habit waking up from all of those times that Hizashi had left his mother broken and bloody, and his scared young self had tried to take care of her. Just as his case finally hits the ground behind him with a clatter, Izuku's fingertips find a strong pulse, and the old man jerks his face up from the floor with a startling abruptness. "I'm alive," he announces with almost comical cheer. Izuku just stares at him for a long moment. "You're alive," he repeats slowly. "You're alive." Thank God. The elderly man's happy-go-lucky smile fades as he squints up at Izuku. Izuku can't even bring himself to care that he's probably fallen for who he supposes is Gran Torino's idea of a joke, or hazing, or whatever it is he's been trying to pull. He rocks back on his heels, crossing his arms and hunching his back, almost hugging himself as he hides how badly his hands are trembling. Izuku should be used to this. Every time Inko had let him out of the closet, after Hizashi had beat her, his heart had leapt to his throat, and he'd been so sure that this would be the time that his mother died. He'd felt it again more recently than when he'd see Aizawa crumpled under the Nomu. He even felt it sometimes when All Might started coughing blood in front of him. Izuku really should be used to this by now. A silent moment that feels like an eternity passes. It hasn't even been half a minute since Izuku had opened the door, and yet the air is so thick. Izuku is crouched into himself, and he pushes down the adrenaline, panic, and sheer relief, while the man he presumes is Gran Torino stares at him, smile replaced by a slowly growing grimace. Then the pregnant silence is broken as Izuku chokes on a bit of flame. Oh, he'd forgotten to negate the backlash of the pull he'd used to fly to Gran Torino's side. Gran Torino just kind of stares at Izuku as he throws up fiery coughs that are smothered in his hand, then sighs as he lifts himself out of the puddle of ketchup, as it turns out. "Change of tactics," he says wryly, not a trace of his former senile act in his voice or actions. "Midori Izuku, you said? Fine." A whirl of air speeds past Izuku as Gran Torino is suddenly everywhere. He slaps the back of Izuku's head none too gently before landing on the wall above the doorway, cutting off Izuku's escape and causing pieces of the wall to crumble ominously. The old man grins challengingly. "Put on your costume and show me what you can do with One for All," he continues, huffing dismissively. "I've seen how you use it at the sports festival. I knew All Might is a fool, but he can be even more of an incompetent idiot when it comes to teaching, which is why I'm going to have to shape you up." And when that fails to elicit much of a reaction out of Izuku, honestly, he is more shell-shocked than anything. He shoots off again, jabbing Izuku's back to make him stumble, too fast and all over the place to give Izuku any time to even think. "What's the matter?" Gran Torino taunts. "All Might truly is a fool to choose a wet blanket like you as the 9th successor. At this rate, you will never be a hero." And at those words, a familiar laugh echoes in Izuku's mind for the first time in days. Izuku jerks. He hadn't noticed how blissful its absence had been until it came back full force. "You haven't forgotten, have you?" Hizashi croons with malicious glee. "It's like I've always said, boy. You can never reach the sun. You belong down here with me." A ghostly touch brushes along his shoulder blades, his scars deceptively light yet burning cold. Like father, like son. And a few weeks ago, even just a few days ago, those words would have been enough to make Izuku even crumble like a house of cards. But the thing is, Hizashi isn't the only one Izuku remembers anymore. Izuku remembers Todoroki putting a hand on his back, the phantom sensation brushing away Hizashi's lingering touch. "We are not our fathers," he had vowed. Izuku remembers Aizawa plopping his cast on Izuku's head and rubbing it in an awkward but kind pat. "You did good," he assured. Izuku remembers All Might crushing him against his chest in a firm yet infinitely gentle embrace. "Always," he had promised. "I am and will always be so proud of you, my boy." Izuku remembers. Hisashi's words may be burned under his eyelids and seared into his beating heart, but their words? Izuku grasps them with his own 2 hands and clutches them tightly to his chest. He treasures and covets those words, using them as a beacon of light and his source of warmth. Those words are firm as steel and bright as stars, and he takes those words and forges them into his sword and shield. And damned if he'll let anyone take that away from him. If even Hisashi couldn't do it, then no one can make Izuku give up on trying to reach the sun, to live up to All Might, not even All Might's own teacher. So Izuku lifts his head, he bares his teeth, and he grins. Gran Torino may have made a mistake. To his defense, the only kid he's ever taught before was Toshinori. Toshinori with his thick skin and even thicker skull, and Nana, who had already covered most of his internal growth, letting Gran Torino only focus on the straightforward process of beating him into shape. Also, in his defense, there was just no way for Gran Torino to know a bit more sensitive with Midoriya Izuku was needed. The kid Gran Torino had seen, the kid the world had seen on TV at the sports festival, had been confident, strong, relentless, and burning so bright to the point of being brilliant, even if he was a little rough around the edges. He didn't think such a bright kid would come from such a dark place. What Gran Torino knew for certain was that teenagers in general aren't easy to handle, and that any successor Toshinori chose was bound to have inherited at least one of his endearingly annoying, or annoyingly endearing, traits, like bull-headed stubbornness or wide-eyed obliviousness, just to name a few. So Gran Torino had planned this internship with a mini Toshinori in mind. The dead corpse stunt with the ketchup and sausages would be perfect for first impressions, to check the kid's reaction and make him question just how much was coincidental and how much was intentional. Gotta keep him on their toes. And to also have some fun, if he's being honest. What, he's an old man in retirement. Entertainment like this doesn't come knocking on his door every day, so sue him. Play the senile act to throw him off and push his buttons to see how much tolerance he has. Purposefully insult Toshinori, because looking up to All Might has clearly been shackling the boy down. And throw taunts and jibes to rile the kid up. Villains will do much worse than just calling him names, after all, and this is as much training as physical conditioning is. But after seeing the way the kid had reacted to what he thought was a corpse and how familiarly he had felt for the pulse, after seeing how calm yet shaken he'd been while facing what he thought was death, after seeing the utter despair in those green eyes for a split second before he'd ducked his head when Gran Torino had taunted he couldn't become a hero, well, like he said, Gran Torino may have made a mistake. Gran Torino has lived long enough to recognize his mistakes and take responsibility for them. He's just about to drop all of his acts and just straight up talk to the boy, apologize and explain, and even comfort him if needed, when Midoriya lifts his head to meet Gran Torino's gaze, dead on. The kid's eyes are no longer hollow, they burn with determination and life, and when he draws his lips back from his teeth, that grin is downright savage. Gran Torino just barely has time for a shiver of anticipation and tension to go down his spine, as Midoriya says, "We'll see about that," simply, voice clear and heavy with promise. Then the boy shoots towards him. Gran Torino launches himself out of the way, his mind racing. Somehow he's gotten the kid to finally get serious about showing his quirk. He has no idea what happened to this kid, and he's damn sure he'll get to the bottom of it, or have someone get to the bottom of it. Like that idiot of a Toshinori who could never do anything by halves and just had to dump his mess of kid in Gran Torino's lap. But for the moment he decides not to look a gift horse in the mouth and make the most of the situation. Recalling the sports festival, Gran Torino quickly runs through what he knows of Midoriya's quirk. He has one for all, of course, but is nowhere near mastering it. He shattered all the fingers in his right hand twice over on the second round of the tournament against Endeavor's son. He was a bit better during the finals, using slight increments to enhance his legs since his arms were out of commission, but it was still too rough and stiff to be used reliably. Part of his original quirk must be some kind of telekinesis or gravity manipulation. It granted him mobility, if not finesse, and it seemed to have some sort of penalty, For the moment, it almost seemed to work like a downgraded version of Gran Torino's quirk, letting Midoriya move quickly but on a straight line. And then there's that fire, that brilliant, gobsmacking, utterly outrageous fire that burst into goddamn wings and casually one-upped the son of the number 2 hero, who's famous for his fire quirk. That fire also seems to be as self-destructive as One for All, though maybe the kid is already starting to work through it, seeing how he didn't seem to be burned after bursting out his fiery wings. Gran Torino keeps these things in mind as he faces off Midoriya. Midoriya, who comes pouncing at Gran Torino again, only for him to evade the kid effortlessly, leaving the kid to slam into a wall instead. The brat's fast, he'll give him that, but that telekinesis or gravity or whatever it is has nothing on Gran Torino's fine-tuned jet blasters, especially in an enclosed space like this. The kid turns to face Gran Torino again, and he can practically hear the gears turning behind those green eyes. Gran Torino can't help but grin as it stretches across his lips. He's more than fine being in retirement, but sometimes, he has missed this thrill. Fancy a zygote like this brat makes him feel alive again. Midoriya's eyes give up on trying to track Gran Torino. Instead, the kid grabs the broken microwave beside him and throws it to the right. As soon as the hefty device goes sailing from his grasp, he gestures his right hand towards the sofa on the far side of the room and pulls it toward him abruptly while he flings his left hand out to the side to erect a wall of flame. Gran Torino sees what he's doing. The kid has given up on tracking his movements or trying to match them, so instead he made a situation where it doesn't matter if he can't keep up with Gran Torino. With the microwave crashing into the furniture on the right, the wall of flames on the left, and the sofa sweeping in towards him, Torino has no choice but to be herded in Midoriya's direction if he wants to avoid injury. Or at least that's what this zygote thinks. "Novice," Gran Torino crows, as his jets help him straighten up, nearly avoiding every trap that the kid had wired. Or at least that's what Gran Torino thought. As soon as Gran Torino's feet leave the ground, the kid lifts his head to follow his movement with his eyes, and he grins. In that moment, Gran Torino realizes, dodging the microwave, avoiding the fire, jumping over the sofa, none of them had been the answer. All of them had been a trap. Seeing the glint in Midoriya's eyes and the sharpness of his grin, Gran Torino realizes with a startling clarity that he is exactly where this wet-behind-the-ears zygote wants him to be. Not much of a zygote after all, eh? Gran Torino feels something latch onto him and pull him towards the boy as Midoriya's entire body lights up with what looks like sparks of green electricity for a split second, before he is simply gone. Even Gran Torino loses sight of the boy for a startled moment before he hears something crashing into the ceiling behind him. He whips his head around, but being in the air means there isn't any firm surface for him to properly blast off. Coupled with his surprise, it's enough to make his reactions just a hair too late to avoid the tackle Midoriya catches him in. A poof sounds as they both land directly on the sofa that Midoriya had pulled, purposefully, Gran Torino realizes now, with reluctantly impressed awe, into just the right position to catch them. The boy himself has Gran Torino's ankles in each of his hands, holding the soles pointed down and anchoring him so that he can't jet off again. He must have figured out that Gran Torino's quirk let the soles of his feet blast him around. Then, knowing that he couldn't catch him normally, he'd laid trap after trap on top of one another, layered, to get Gran Torino exactly where he wanted to so that he could catch up with him, in a sense, by prediction and manipulation. And only when he had Gran Torino exactly where he wanted had he busted out his trump card, all while making sure that neither of them would get too hurt by placing the sofa, again, exactly in the right place to catch them. And he hadn't even changed into his costume. No wonder Toshinori chose this boy, regardless of whatever skeletons he has stuffed in his closet. "So," the boy prompts with a devilish grin, "how was that?" And does Gran Torino feel an answering grin tug on his lips. He forces his back, though, because instead he scoops up his cane from the floor and bonks the boy's head with it. "It ain't over till it's over, brat. Never let your guard down," he barks gruffly, and even though he is secretly impressed. He wiggles his legs until the boy lets him go, and then sits up properly on the sofa and pats the seat next to him. "Care to explain what you did there?" Midoriya blinks, likely a little thrown by the gap between Gran Torino's gruff tone and the inviting gesture, though he follows wordlessly and settles on the seat next to him. "I realized that you were probably trying to provoke me on purpose, so I wondered why. You're the one who nominated me in the first place, after all. You mentioned All Might a lot, specifically, so you know about One for All, and I assumed that you saw the sports festival, so I assumed you were trying to teach me something about the way I use my quirk. We already know that going all out and using 100% breaks my fingers, and so I use 5%. I can handle all my legs during the finals. But it was stiff and unwieldy, so I had to think of a better way to use One for All. At this point, Midoriya has a small smile that curves onto his lips. Someone recently told me that even if we inherit them, my quirk is my power. Thinking of that in the context of One for All, I had the idea to use the upper limit that I can handle on all parts of my body at all times, like a microwave, evenly distributing heat. But even then, I wasn't sure how I could catch up with you, so I tried to make a situation where I knew I could. This time, Midoriya points a finger at the cushion that has fallen to the floor and crooks his finger at it. It gently soars towards him, and he catches it and pats it down in place on the sofa. My original quirk lets me pull things towards me, or pull me towards them if it's too heavy. It's kind of like a grappling hook, I guess. I can only pull one thing at a time, though, and as a consequence of using the pull, I have to push a bit of fire out myself, he says, this time curling his left hand into a cage as his small burst of flame swirls inside. And vice versa, but if I try to suppress it, it bursts out of me like when I coughed out fire earlier. It's like when a water hose bursts and you block the nozzle instead. Midoriya closes his fist and extinguishes the flame. So, that's pretty much it. Quirk analysis is my specialty. I knew the tools I have. I guessed your quirk by observing. I have pretty good situational awareness and knew that the new use of One for All would throw you off for at least a split second, so I saved it to use at the last moment. Gran Torino just kind of stares at Midoriya, who's been full-on muttering away as he explains his quirk and seems to grow a bit self-conscious only now that he's done rambling. At this boy that has 3 powerful quirks and compares them to a grappling hook, a water hose, and a goddamn microwave. This kid. And Gran Torino can't keep it in anymore. He laughs. Impressive, he admits. You figured out that I'd been aiming to teach you within the first half hour that you stepped foot in here. He thinks back on the moment Midoriya started fighting back. We'll see about that, the brat had said with a grin. It looks like they will, and oh, does Gran Torino look forward to it. He hops off of the sofa. We're going to have to refine that new technique of yours, though. Situational awareness or not, you're going to have to learn to harness it. Make it yours. Make it sing. He pauses and looks at the boy. Got a name for it? Midoriya grins. Full Cowl. Izuku hasn't ever really thought of it before, but he realizes that he's always thought of his quirks as not really his own, but others. One for All is All Might's power, of course, but it had started far before that. He had thought of the pull as his mother's, and he had thought of the push of fire as Hizashi's. But even if we inherited it, it's our power, Todoroki's soft voice affirms in his memories. And he's right. Izuku had been too cautious with his quirks, like they were something that he was borrowing and not something that was his and part of him. Hell, he'd spent most of his life actively not using his quirk, to the point where anyone who hadn't seen his official records wondered if he was quirkless. Considering that other people have been playing around with and training their quirks since they were 4, Izuku has a lot of catching up to do. He's been a bit better about it once he started training with All Might, trying to figure out his quirk, find ways around the backlash, and, with Todoroki's help, finally training to understand and work on the fire part of his quirk as well. And now he has, at last, a better grip on One for All, too. It's still a measly 5%, but it's still a world of a difference compared to before. His full cowl slots in perfectly with his original quirk, boosting his agility while negating the jarring momentum of his pull and compensating for the lack of punch in his push without having to worry about any backlash. That doesn't stop Gran Torino from utterly trouncing him after that first time that Izuku had the element of surprise, though. In between breaks, meals, and short mentions of All Might's own time as Gran Torino's student, Gran Torino thoroughly wipes the floor with Izuku. Not that Izuku would have it any other way. If anything, considering how much All Might had shaken when thinking of his past mentor, and how Gran Torino himself mentioned that he'd beaten All Might until he puked, Izuku would tentatively guess that he's having a far easier time than All Might once had. It may just be that Gran Torino is going easy on Izuku since he's not as good as All Might once was, or it may be that Gran Torino's prowess, however formidable it still is, had waned with time. Probably both. Either way, these past few days have been fairly good. Izuku hasn't had the opportunity to just train without thinking of anything else since before the UA entrance exam when he was preparing his body with All Might. After that, he'd been thrust with the weight of carrying One for All, the dilemma of his quirk, meeting Aizawa, the League of Villains, the chaotic whirlwind that was the sports festival. Training with Gran Torino, however, allows no time for anything else, and he appreciates the simplicity of it. Gran Torino even apologized for how their initial meeting had gone, in that gruff but straightforward way of his. Izuku had been taken aback by that, since he'd already figured out it was probably the elderly man purposely provoking him to haze and size him up. But it seems that Gran Torino has a set of standards that he stubbornly insists on, even with himself, much like Iida. Actually, in that regard, Izuku has a theory. His long-standing theory that a person's quirk reflects their personality traits. He's not sure if it's the case that the quirk manifests in the way that visibly shows the wielder's personality, or if the personality is shaped by the quirk. Maybe there isn't really a knowable order, like the chicken and the egg. It's more or less apparent depending on the person, of course, but Izuku has seen enough evidence to believe it's true. Take Uraraka, for example. Her sweet, earnest, compassionate personality brings happiness to everyone she interacts with. She had taken the nickname Deku, that had been created to weigh down Izuku, and made it feel light and freeing. And just like her personality, her quirk relieves gravity from everything and anyone she touches. Kirishima with his rock-hard determination, Aoyama's twinkling wink, Ojiro's straightforward yet reliable character, Sato's surprisingly sweet side. Hell, just look at Bakugo. You could take one look at him and describe both his personality and quirk with the same word. Explosive. Izuku's in the middle of his musings when Gran Torino suddenly announces a change of pace. Fighting against the same opponent is only going to build bad habits. Get a move on, we're going out of town to catch some villains. Gran Torino declares with his usual abruptness. Like he was saying, Izuku has a theory. Much like Iida has the tendency to barrel through life with his endearing eccentricity, Gran Torino also tends to zoom off unabashedly and leave others floundering in his wake. But unlike Iida, who's more straightforward, narrow, focused, and finds it harder to make sharp turns, Gran Torino is all over the place. Izuku can see it in the way that he rapidly donned and shed each act when they'd first met in his effort to provoke Izuku, and again in the way he just springs in an impromptu villain hunting session. But again, Izuku wouldn't have it any other way. He just quirks a small smile as he follows Gran Torino. Despite their rickety start, he's really quickly come to genuinely like and respect this eccentric hero that was once All Might's teacher and is now his as well. On the train, Izuku flips out his phone. The "Passing through Hosu, how are you doing, Iida?" that he'd sent to Iida is marked read but unreplied to. Considering how Iida normally replies within 3 minutes of reading a message and is insistent on having the last word in a text version of "No, you hang up first," his lack of response is worrying. Of course, it could be just that he's busy with his internship, but considering how off he's been lately. Izuku shakes his head and makes himself turn off the chat log with Iida. He'd promised Iida that he'd let him decide when he needed Izuku, so he won't pry. Instead, he flicks over the growing chat log with Todoroki. "Passing Hosu on my way to Shibuya. You doing all right?" He doesn't get to see the hurried, "I'm currently in Hosu right now," that has typos all through it that Todoroki wouldn't normally make, as if the words had tumbled out of his mouth in a rush. Izuku doesn't get to see the "Yes, all is well, thank you," that follows almost instantly, a bit more composed and formal at first glance, but actually glowing with the warm regard compressed in just a few words. He doesn't even get to see the "But it would have been better with you," that is sent a few moments later, awkward and fumbling, typed with great hesitation and painstaking care. Izuku doesn't get to see them, because before he can, something far too familiar crashes into the side of the train. "Nomu?" Izuku gapes, because this being may not look exactly the same as the black-skinned hulk that still haunts Izuku's nightmares crouched atop Aizawa, but Izuku still recognizes that distinct exposed brain and popping eyes. 4 eyes this time. Anywhere. Screams fill the air. "Stay here, kid," Gran Torino orders as he jets off, body slamming the Nomu out of the train and away from the civilians. "Gran Torino!" Izuku calls, but the hero is already too far away. Instead of the hero, what Izuku sees is Hosu City that is riddled with explosions and screams. His breath catches. Gran Torino had told him to stay put. Izuku doesn't even have a hero license or supervision of a pro. But there are people out there. There's a Nomu out there. And Izuku has never been able to leave someone in need of help. "Sorry, Gran Torino." Izuku thinks with a grimace as he vaults over the broken seats and heads towards the hole the Nomu and the Gran Torino had left through. "Hey!" A member of the crew calls out to Izuku as he speeds by. "It's dangerous. We have to keep together and wait for the heroes to—" He trails off when Izuku turns to face him. "You're that Midoriya." It pays to have won the UA Sports Festival live on national TV. Izuku had gotten so much attention in the days following the sports festival that he, partly flattered, partly frustrated, and partly just straight out terrified, had started going to school half an hour earlier just to avoid as much attention. But in circumstances like this, having his name and face known is undeniably helpful. The fact that Izuku is known as a UA student who won the sports festival, coupled with the hero costume he's wearing, now seems to give the crew pause, as if he's unsure if he should stop Izuku or not anymore. Izuku isn't technically supposed to be running off on his own, but Izuku takes advantage of the fact that he doesn't know that. While the crew member is hesitating, Izuku nods to him as if to say, "You do your job, I'll do mine," before jumping out of the gaping hole. He turns on full cowl and he runs. Once Izuku hits the streets, he can spot a clear flow in the panicked crowd. They're all running away from the center of commotion downtown, which of course is exactly what Izuku runs straight towards. And once he gets there, the sight that greets him looks like a scene straight from hell. Buildings and vehicles are shattered to pieces all around. There are Nomu, not just one, but two, and neither of them, even the ones that he'd seen just a moment before. Gran Torino isn't within sight either, but the dozen or so heroes who are here are clearly out of their depth. Izuku's eyes flicker about, trying to assess the situation, and how best to help. But then a cry grabs a hold of his attention. "Tenya!" he hears someone call in distress. Izuku's head snaps their way to find the normal hero, Manuel. He should be the internship supervisor of Iida. Izuku's blood runs cold. Iida, whose presence is glaringly absent. Dread fills his veins, and Izuku should be used to this feeling by now. But he isn't. Before he knows it, Izuku has shot forward in a burst of green static. "Where's Iida?" he gasps, as he skids to a stop at Manuel's side. His usual impeccable manners are nowhere to be found. Manuel jumps at his sudden appearance. To his credit, the hero didn't attack Izuku on the spot, but takes him in and his eyes flash over Izuku's obviously young body, the hero suit that he's wearing despite it, and the familiar face that has been broadcasted all over the country. Midoriya, you should be evacuating. Where's your supervisor?" Manuel manages, probably haven't figured out that Izuku is here for his internship as well. "Busy," Izuku replies curtly. "As you are. Manuel, please. Where is Iida?" The normal hero looks like he's going to insist, but then a roar from a Nomu and panic shouts from the heroes fill the air. Manuel winces, then seems to steel himself. "I last saw him in the alleyway 3 blocks over from here," he says, pointing in the direction while stepping forward to join his comrades. "And Midoriya, be careful. Tenya might be tracking down the hero killer. Don't engage, just find and bring Tenya back." And with that load taken off his mind, the hero runs off once more into the fray. Izuku's mind is reeling. Iida tracking down the hero killer Stain? Why? He doesn't understand, but soon shakes off his confusion. There's no time for that, so instead Izuku charges up full cowl once again and shoots off, weaving through the deserted roads and dark alleys. "Iida!" Izuku calls. "Iida!" The longer no one answers him, the tighter his throat closes up, but Izuku pushes down his welling fear, grits his teeth, and forces his legs to move faster. It's when he turns another nondescript corner that he finds them. Iida is lying face down on the ground. Stain is standing over him, pinning him to the floor with one foot, while a hand is already bringing down the katana raised in the air. He brings it down on Iida's neck. Blood sprays in the air, and Izuku really should be used to this by now. Used to the sensation and wondering if you're watching someone die. Used to the utter terror that you might lose someone. He's felt this while watching Aizawa, All Might, and countless times watching his mother. Once more watching Iida shouldn't be anything new. He really, really should be used to this. But he isn't. He isn't. A strangled sound leaves Izuku's mouth, only for it to be whipped away as the wind pushes past him when he flies forward. He pulls at Stain with all of his fear and desperation, and the force of it is strong enough to make the villain fold over into himself, almost comically as he's yanked backwards. Izuku dodges him, making him ram into the far wall, and sprints to Iida's side. "Iida!" Izuku gasps, kneeling down beside his friend and automatically feeling for a pulse with shaking hands. There's a long cut in Iida's throat, blood gushing out in terrifying torrents, the red rapidly pooling under him and staining his previously pristine white armor. But he's still breathing, if panicked and quick. His pulse yammers under Izuku's fingertips, and his eyes are focused enough to find Izuku. Midori. Stop that, Izuku says, coughing on a bit of fire as he clamps one hand over Iida's neck to apply pressure on the wound. Don't talk. Thankfully, it looks like Izuku's been able to pull Stain off before his blade went through cleanly. But the wound is still bleeding profusely. At this rate, Iida just might bleed to death if they don't get him medical attention soon. If only he'd been just a bit faster to arrive, just a bit quicker to find Iida, just a few seconds sooner. But Izuku was too late. Too late. Midoriya, Iida says, and though his voice is still hoarse, it's no longer something on the verge of a gurgle. What are you doing here? His question almost fills Izuku with something that feels suspiciously like hysteria. Me? He asks back, and there's something almost wild in his voice. What are you doing here alone? You could have told Manuel and his agency. You could have told me. You said that you'll let me know if you need me. I didn't want you, Iida bursts out. Izuku freezes. Not only was Izuku too late, but Iida doesn't even want Izuku's help. But then again, Inko had not wanted Izuku to step between her and Hisashi. Bakugo hadn't wanted to be rescued by Izuku from the slime villain. Aizawa didn't want to be protected by his own student. Shinso hadn't wanted Izuku to help him. Even Todoroki hadn't wanted Izuku to help him. And Izuku has never let that stop him. Izuku tightens his jaw. A sort of calm falls upon him. Iida's rejection and his own mess of emotions fail to impact him as much anymore. Izuku knows it'll come back to bite him later, all the horror and terror and guilt and panic, but at this moment all of that is smoothed over by the overpowering need to save. Izuku taps his phone discreetly with his free hand behind his back. Sorry, Iida, he says in a deceptively light tone, but I've never been able to leave someone in need of help. Besides, All Might said that meddling in others' business is the essence of being a hero. Iida's face falls, while another voice finally breaks into their conversation. Oh, Stain breathes, his face lit up with unholy delight. The villain has picked himself off the wall and is now staring at Izuku with unnerving intensity. All Might, eh? And you're not just some fanboy, you're a true follower of his ideals, aren't you? Not only that, but you have the brains and skills to back it up. You blindsided me, and purposely threw me as far away from your friend as you could, even within that short moment, he says gleefully. Izuku, whose gaze had automatically trailed up from Iida at Stain's voice, catches sight of another figure slumped against a wall. He recognizes him as the pro-hero native, and while his eyes are open and responsive, his body slags like a rag doll, or like Iida. Another one, Izuku thinks as he bites his lip, another one he'd been too late to save completely. So many fools out there that are nothing but talk, Stain continues. But you... And with the villain's eyes boring into him, Izuku makes up his mind. He can't run away from Stain with 2 wounded people. He can't fight Stain since he needs to keep pressure on Iida's throat, so all he can do is buy time and hope that reinforcements are on the way. He sent a mass text to his classmates with his location. Hopefully at least one of them will clue in and ask someone to contact the hero agencies in Hosu and send some pros. Besides, Izuku has always been good at turning negative attention away from someone else and onto himself. Thanks, but no thanks. Despite the fact that this is the most I've been complimented in the past few days, I'd rather it not be by you, Izuku runs his mouth. Probably has something to do with, I don't know, the fact that you're a villain with the moniker Hero Killer, or maybe the fact that you tried to kill my friend. And then he puts on his best Aizawa deadpan face as he could, and he places his free hand over his chest. Don't misunderstand. It's not me. It's you. A disbelieving silence descends on the alleyway. Iida and Native are just staring at Izuku like they're questioning what they've just heard, or questioning Izuku's sanity. Both of them seem to be of the opinion that provoking a serial killer is simply not something you casually do. Well, welcome to Izuku's life, he supposes. After a moment of stunned silence, Stain throws his head back with a bark of laughter. Oh, got a mouth on you too, huh? No wonder Shigaraki likes you. Shigaraki. Izuku swallows and grins almost reflexively, hiding behind it like a mask. Now he has a new goal, fish for more information while still buying time. Didn't know the hero killer teamed up with the League of Villains, he says in a deceptively casual voice. Izuku figured out Shigaraki had pushed all the right buttons in a few sparse moments that he had the USJ, and while Stain is nowhere near as simple as Shigaraki's childishness, he's done his research on Stain. What with Iida's situation being what it is, he can make an educated guess. I would have thought your ideals clash with his lack of one. It does, Stain scoffs. I'll be going back to deal with him later, but did you know that he carries around a photo of you? No, he did not. A shiver goes down Izuku's spine. Izuku doesn't dare take his eyes off of Stain, but he sees Iida's eyes dart to his face from the corner of his vision. He must have felt the tremble go through the hand that Izuku is keeping on his neck. Izuku recalls Shigaraki's sinking into Kurogiri's portal with a manic grin, stretching his wrinkled lips behind the severed hand on his face. Let's play again, he had said, and now he's apparently carrying around a photo of Izuku and showing it off to serial killers. Okay, wow, that's not creepy at all, he manages to bite out. Stain shrugs. He's got taste at the very least. Didn't expect it, but it's one thing we can agree on. And wow again, that's so not creepy at all. Thanks, but no thanks, Izuku manages in a strangled voice. I'd really rather keep my frantic villain count to 0. I should hope so, a new voice intervenes. You're enough of a lightning rod for trouble as it is. A bolt of fire shoots out and drives Stain further away from the three. Izuku whips his head around. Todoroki, he breathes. Midoriya, he returns while stepping into the alleyway. Next time, be more specific. I was almost too late. Izuku lets out a shaky puff of laughter. What do you mean, late? You got here in under 5 minutes. To anyone else, Todoroki might look calm and collected, but Izuku can read the minute tells. He can hear the ragged breathing that Todoroki is stifling, evidence of how urgently he had rushed here. He can see how Todoroki's gaze flickers, and about how he is trying to take in the situation, dwelling the longest on Izuku and twitching subtly at the pool of blood growing under Iida. He can feel the fear and the relief in those mismatched eyes. Izuku understands how terrified on their behalf Todoroki must have been, so he does his best to reassure the other boy. He grins. You're using your left side, and you don't look like half an icicle anymore, he says in reference to Todoroki's new costume, overly bright on purpose. It's partly to make light of the situation and reassure Todoroki, but it also partly might be the nerves and steadily building hysteria getting to him. Thankfully, Todoroki doesn't call Izuku out. Instead, he rolls with it, just like before. They just seem to click, and a look of understanding flashes over Todoroki's face before it's smoothed over. The edge of his expression has thawed with relief, and the corner of his lips quirk up just the tiniest bit. As with all the other times, Izuku had ventured to joke with him. Todoroki meets him part way, with a dry quip of his own. And you still look like a bunny. I do not. Todoroki doesn't even dignify Izuku's indignant protest with a reply as he stomps his right foot and sends out a path of ice. The ice crystallizes and rises up, making the prone form of native slide, and roll over towards Izuku and Iida. Todoroki takes a stance in front of the rest of them, facing Stain. Don't worry, the pros are on their way, he says in a voice that purposely carries clearly to Stain. The villain tisks, clearly irritated at having been interrupted so many times. Don't let him cut you, Native gasped from the floor. That kid and I couldn't move since he cut us. That's probably his quirk. Explains all the blades, Todoroki mutters as his eyes trail over to lock his gaze with Izuku. An entire conversation seems to pass between them in that second. Izuku lets himself isn't actually paralyzed, but he needs to keep pressure on Iida's throat since the other boy can't do it himself. That means that Todoroki is the only one going up against Stain right now. I'm so sorry is bitten off before it can be formed. Izuku can't even dare to utter those words, trauma mingling with terror and horror at the thought that his message is the reason Todoroki is in danger right now. Izuku had been hoping for a group of pro-heroes when he'd sent that quick message. While he's thankful Todoroki came, quick and loyal and brave and alone, he's also terrified on his behalf. Not only was he too late to save Iida, but he also called Todoroki to Stain. But there is no regret or resentment in Todoroki's eyes. If anything, he seems to be relieved here. I want to be here. And I'm the best suited for a long-range fight anyways. I'll just keep my distance. His reassurance is cut short by a knife that sails through the air and grazes his cheek. Todoroki just barely manages to make eyes shoot up quickly enough to block the other jagged blade that Stain swings at him. But Stain glances upward, and Todoroki instinctively follows his eyes to find a katana whirling down towards him from the sky. and taking advantage of his moment of distraction, Stain grabs Todoroki's collar and yanks him forward to lick the blood off of the cut on his cheek. His long tongue sweeps across Todoroki's cheek and almost brushes the wound when a burst of fire pushes Stain back. But it isn't Todoroki's fire. Before he had time to think on it, something pulls Todoroki away. Todoroki stumbles slightly, but quickly rights himself, looking back at Izuku with gratitude in his eyes. Izuku has his free hand outstretched, flickers of red residue flame licking his fingertips. "Blood," he says tersely. "It's not just a cut, but he needs to ingest the blood." "Huh," Stain acknowledges with a smirk. "Working that brain of yours, I see. Good." Izuku ignores Stain's fixation with him and grits his teeth. Quirk analysis is Izuku's specialty, after all. If a cut is all Stain needs, then Todoroki should have gone limp and the moment that first knife had grazed his cheek, but he hadn't, and Stain had laid the trap so that he could either cut him more or lick Todoroki's cut. Izuku's mind is in overdrive. He replays the short and fast exchange that took place within seconds. He thinks of the knife thrown at Todoroki's head, easily dodged but leaving a cut that can be exploited later. Stain had used the moment Todoroki was caught off guard to close the distance and swing the jagged-like saw blade in close quarters. But even before all that, he had thrown the katana up in the air, predicting the precise timing it would come spiraling down. Then, when he needed the distraction, Stain had purposely drawn Todoroki's attention away from himself to the katana, and in the split second that Todoroki had looked up, the villain lunged for the cut on his cheek. The knife, the blade, the katana, it didn't matter which one that Todoroki fell for. None of them had been the answer. All of them had been a trap. Izuku presses his lips into a thin line. His mind is whirling, thoughts flickering with focused intensity. Out of all the people he's ever met, Stain has the fighting style that is most similar to Izuku's own. Both of them rely on speed rather than brute force. Both of them are strategic planners, layering trap upon trap to snare their target absolutely. But compared to Izuku, Stain far outstrips him in strength and experience, and sheer ruthless brutality. So in other words, he's a bigger, stronger, faster, crueler version of what Izuku could be, upgraded in every aspect in a sinister way. And that thought terrifies Izuku. Despite Izuku's faith in Todoroki's abilities, this is the villain with the moniker the Hero Killer. He can't take Stain on his own, but Izuku can't stand by his side. He grits his teeth as Todoroki sends a wave of ice towards Stain. He tries freezing the villain to the ground, erecting walls to obscure his vision, but nothing keeps the villain back for more than a few seconds at a time. "No," Iida gasps from his position prone on the ground. Izuku can feel his pulse racing under his palm, pumping out blood all the faster. "Both of you shouldn't be here. I inherited my brother's name. I have to do this." "Why?" Izuku can't help but burst out. He'd meant to tell Iida to stop speaking and calm down, lest he bleed out faster. But frustration and adrenaline gets the better of him. He promised Iida that he'd be there if he needed him, but Iida almost died because Izuku was too late. They both might have died if Todoroki hadn't come, and they all might still die. He can't bear that, and yet Iida... "Why do you insist on doing this alone?" Iida looks like he wants to cry right now, looking desperate and apologetic, and determined and frustrated and so mad at the same time. "Stain attacked my brother. Tensei was my hero, and Stain made sure that he'd never be a hero again. Of course I want to take him on my own. You understand, don't you?" Iida looks up at Izuku. Izuku has no idea what Iida sees in his expression, but the righteous fury in Iida's eyes flickers and falters upon Izuku's face. You don't," Iida says with dawning realization. And in a startling moment of clarity, Izuku realizes as well. He realizes the reason that he hadn't been able to guess where Iida was himself and had to ask Manuel. He realizes the reason that he hadn't been able to find Iida quick enough. He realizes what sets him apart from Iida, from even Todoroki. "You," Stain breathes, coming to the same conclusion. Izuku raises his head from Iida to see that both Stain and Todoroki have come to a temporary pause and are staring at him with disbelief. "You," Stain says again, and for some reason he looks gleeful, like he unexpectedly struck gold, like he's found something precious. "You don't understand revenge." Stain laughs delightedly. "I can't believe it," he says, throwing his head back to crow in laughter. "To think there's actually someone who's so selfless that he doesn't understand the very concept of revenge." Iida is at a loss for words. He had known that Midoriya is infinitely kind, and that he puts others before himself, but to think that his selflessness extends to the point that he doesn't understand revenge when Iida himself is so consumed by it, it blows his mind and dampers his blazing hatred. He can now feel the hand that Midoriya has clasped on the wound on his neck, the hand that's literally the only thing keeping him alive, and it's shaking and trembling violently. Stain grins at Midoriya. I knew you were different from these phonies, but this just proves that you're so much more. With a mindset like that, you might even be on par with All Might. And he's right, Iida thinks dully. Hadn't even All Might himself taken interest in Midoriya, but Iida had been so consumed with his own vengeance that he hadn't even spared a thought for the other hero that had been slumped in the alleyway. Save him first, Stain had told him with disgust, if you call yourself a hero. And that had been exactly what Midoriya had done, hadn't it? He'd flown to Iida's rescue, finding him even when Iida had purposely ignored the hand held out to him, and had stayed with him when Iida rejected him. No, Midoriya grits out, and it sounds like it's costing him to force out of his voice. This just proves how little you really understand about what it means to be a hero. With that, he makes a sharp gesture with his free hand, and a knife that Iida hadn't even noticed comes flying towards him. It looks like Stain had thrown it in Todoroki's direction, hoping that everyone was too distracted. The knife pivots mid-air, inches from Todoroki's chest, and embeds itself in Midoriya's forearm instead. Todoroki gasps, a strangled breath that sounds like, Midoriya! And in the next moment, he's hurling ice at Stain with a vengeance. Stain breaks through the wall of ice that Todoroki had made and throws a handful of knives at him. Midoriya pulls Todoroki away while pushing Stain back with a concentrated burst of fire, still crouched next to Iida and keeping one hand on his wound. But unlike before, Stain seems to recover even faster and stronger. Perhaps talking to Midoriya had awakened something inside of him, or perhaps the countdown ticking to when the pro will inevitably arrive is driving him, but he's more fierce than ever before. Todoroki is at his limits, erecting wall after icy wall, trusting Midoriya to see the bigger picture and keep him away from Stain's frenzied blades. No, stop it, Iida pleads. I can't take it. Then stand up, Todoroki barks. Stand up and face who you really want to become. His furied shout sends a jolt down Iida's spine. I am Ingenium, he remembers telling Stain, the hero who will take you down. But he also remembers the real Ingenium, his brother, how much Iida had looked up to him all his life, how despite coming from a whole family of heroes, it had been Tensei that he had chosen as his role model, and how his older brother had let out an embarrassed but pleased laugh at his words. He remembers Midoriya, how much Iida had looked up to both his physical and internal strength, even though they were the same age. How much the words that he relies on Iida had touched him, how much he hadn't wanted to let him down, and how his subtle kindness of letting him have his space had soothed him. And he had flung aside his brother's ideals and slapped away Midoriya's outstretched hand. Now both Todoroki and Midoriya are bleeding for him. He can see the bloody cut on Todoroki's cheek as he wrestles with Stain, and he can feel the blood from Midoriya's forearm drip down and mingle with the puddle of Iida's own blood. Stain is right. He's not like them. Not like his brother, who said he wants to be the kind of hero that can help a crying child. Not like Todoroki, who abandoned everything and came running the moment he received Midoriya's text. Not like Midoriya. Be that as it may, he can't drag them down any more. Midoriya, he calls quietly. His mind races as he thinks for the first time, not about himself, but of how to help his friends. You can use fire too, so I need you to cauterize my neck. Midoriya takes in a sharp breath. Iida, he hisses. No. Midoriya, he counters. Be reasonable. You're good at that. Since I can't put pressure on my wound, you've had to do it for me, rendering you immobile. But Todoroki cannot win against Stain on his own. I'll bleed to death without you, but if you cauterize the wound, then you'll prevent that, and also be able to fight with Todoroki. I know that, but Iida, I don't have enough control. What if I hurt you? I can't. And there's something almost fearful in Midoriya's voice, that note of his words bordering on pleading. The pros will be here soon, Midoriya says, and it sounds like he's trying to convince himself just as much as Iida. Just hang on, Iida, and don't think of doing anything drastic. My fire isn't... He trails off, but Iida locks his eyes with Midoriya the best that he can, with how he's paralyzed. You won't hurt me, Midoriya. You'll be saving me. And Todoroki, so please, Iida argues, almost begs. Please, don't make me watch you bleed for me more than you already have. Midoriya closes his eyes. A brief moment passes before they reopen. Vibrantly green, hard with determination, and shining with unshed tears, He rips off his bunny ear-like hood and stuffs the green fabric inside Iida's mouth. Bite down on it, he instructs tersely. This is going to hurt, a lot. Trust me. Before Iida can remind Midoriya that he'll be saving, not hurting Iida, Midoriya finally takes his hand off of Iida's wound and instead holds molten fire over it. A scream builds inside Iida's throat even as he clamps down his teeth on the cloth. He can tell, even while choking down his screams, that Midoriya is doing his best to make the flame as small as possible while still wielding and welding his flesh together. It doesn't matter. It still hurts. Midoriya was right. It hurts a lot. Shit, Todoroki thinks as Stain dodges around both his ice and fire. Has anyone ever told you that relying on your quirk makes you sloppy? The villain asks, as he darts in to close the range and whips out his katana. The tip of the blade makes a shallow but long wound on Todoroki's abdomen, slicing through his suit and skin, and Todoroki makes to envelop the villain in ice, but before he can, Stain tilts the katana to his face and licks the blood off the blade. Shit, he says out loud this time, and he crumples to the ground. He can't move a finger, and without being able to see or move properly, he can't use his quirk effectively. Midoriya! He's about to call out a warning when a green blur shoots out from behind him and tackles Stain away. In the same instant, it detaches from Stain to leave him flying back while the bolt of crackling green lightning dashes back in a flash and carefully picks Todoroki up and flies back to set him down gently next to Native. Stain throws a barrage of knives at them, but only a few graze Midoriya's legs while most of them are blown away by a powerful kick from a white blur. Then both are gone in a flash again as they charge towards Stain. Midoriya and Iida? Todoroki gapes from where Midoriya had leaned him against the wall. But Izuku doesn't have time to focus on his friend as he grits his teeth and throws himself at Stain with everything he has. He knows that Iida was right. Cauterizing his wound was the best option to heighten their chances of all four of them living longer, but if only Izuku hadn't been so late, they wouldn't have had to do it in the first place. He wouldn't have had to make Iida scream. But he did make him scream, and he was too late, so Izuku grits his teeth against the tears building up and bares his teeth instead. Never again, he promises himself. Never again, Iida says, as if echoing his own thoughts, will I let this happen. I'm sorry. Stain was right about me, but I won't break, because if I do, then the name Ingenium dies with me. Stain scoffs. I don't buy it. People don't change so easily, and you're a fake who prioritized your own desires. A cancer on this society warped by so-called heroes. He brings his blade down on Iida again. Like I said, Izuku interferes as he pulls the blade away from Iida. You have no idea what it means to be a hero. The blade is pulled clean out of Stain's grasp. Due to Izuku moving around erratically with full cowl, the blade impales Izuku's left calf. His knees buckle, but he pushes through the pain and pulls yet another knife that Stain throws at Iida's throat. This time he manages to catch the knife, though he catches it by the blade. Midoriya! Todoroki and Iida call out in alarm. Izuku's bloodied hand carelessly throws the knife over his shoulder, then breaks off the unwieldy handle sticking out on his leg, and tosses it after the knife. Ice these over so he can't use them again, he says shortly. He hears a crackle of ice as Todoroki does so, even as he calls Izuku's name worriedly. Then he drags his unresponsive leg along as he takes off again. Todoroki is out of commission. Stain is strong enough to pierce through Iida's armor, and Iida has lost too much blood to even be moving in the first place. Izuku has to fight. Stain throws more knives at the vulnerable Todoroki, but this time Iida blocks them by catching the knives in his arm. Then he shoots off again, whizzing around Stain's attacks and looking for an opening. The glint in Stain's eyes is frenzied. Far from being intimidated by Todoroki's threat that the pros are coming, he seems to be dead set on killing Native and Iida before they do. And while that makes him faster, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous, it also makes him just the slightest bit sloppy. Just enough for Izuku to exploit. Izuku blasts a wall of fire behind Stain to cut off his retreat, then pulls himself towards Stain. The villain jumps in the air to avoid him, and the fire, but that's exactly where Izuku wanted him. Iida follows him into the air with a burst of his engines, and Izuku pivots with full cowl and jumps on Stain's other side. Caught between them in air, Stain has nowhere to go. Izuku thinks that he sees himself reflected in Stain's eyes, for a split second before his fist connects with Stain's face, and Iida's kick hits the villain's spine. I will defeat you, this time as a villain and a hero, Iida shouts as he flips and connects a second hit. A resounding crack rings through the air, and Stain's eyes lose focus. All three of them fall from the air, and Todoroki catches them with a hastily built wave of ice. Izuku lands on his bad leg and has to bite back a yelp as the force jars the portion of the blade that's still embedded inside. He ignores the pain, though, and struggles to his feet as soon as possible. "Get up," Todoroki says urgently, seemingly on the same wavelength as Izuku. "He's still—" But then when they take a look at Stain, they find him lying motionless on the jagged ice. Silence falls between them for a tense moment. Is he unconscious?" Iida asks cautiously. "It ain't over till it's over," Izuku says shakily, quoting Gran Torino's words. "We should tie him up and strip him of his weapons, and we need to get you to a doctor, Iida." "We need to get you to a doctor, too," Todoroki returns reproachfully. He then stands up, a little wobbly but determined. "The paralysis has worn off. I'm the least hurt thanks to you two, so stand down while I do it." Izuku's mind sluggishly runs through all the possibilities. Did the effect wear off now that Stain is unconscious? But no, Native is paralyzed still. Then does the number of people affect the result? Amount of blood consumed? Blood type? As he wobbles a bit, the loss of adrenaline and blood leaving him exhausted. He is very carefully not looking at the broken blade that's still sticking out of his calf. Soon enough, Native is also able to move and helps Todoroki. Then they're dragging a tied-up Stain and leaving the alleyway. "Careful now," Native tells Izuku as he crouches in front of him with his back to Izuku. "Sorry for the trouble," Izuku says as he clambers onto the hero's back. The man laughs shakily at that. "Sorry? That's what I should be saying. I'm a pro, and all I did was get in the way." "It would have happened to anyone in a one-on-one situation," Izuku consoles him. Native hefts Izuku on his back easily and starts walking. Iida and Todoroki by his side, with Todoroki dragging Stain. "We only won because it was a 3-on-1 and he made a mistake," Todoroki continues Izuku's line of thought. "He probably got too anxious to see through Midoriya's trap. Then Iida's reciprocal burst was too fast and he couldn't react to Midoriya." "He didn't," Izuku quietly corrects. He recalls seeing his own reflection clearly in Stain's eyes. "He saw me. He purposely didn't react. He let me hit him." Silence falls between the four of them as they ponder that fact. And then they're assaulted by a horde of heroes led by none other than Gran Torino. "Midoriya," the hero sputters. "What are you doing here?" And then the entire gaggle of heroes follow. "This is the alley. Wait, is that the hero killer? Kids? They're badly hurt. Someone call the ambulances." No wonder Endeavor told us to come here, not to mention that we've been getting calls from all over the country to head over. Oh, it looks like some of his other classmates have clued in on Izuku's distress call. He's going to have to send a group message again to thank them and let them know they're safe now. Native lets Izuku off his back to wait for the ambulance. The moment that Izuku's feet touch the ground, Todoroki is beside him, silently offering his hand. Izuku glances up at the other boy. Todoroki looks back steadily with his mismatched eyes. A small smile, thankful, playful, relieved, plays at Izuku's mouth as he takes Todoroki's hand. Todoroki takes their entwined hands carefully over his head as he draws Izuku's right arm over his shoulders, then snakes his left arm around Izuku's waist in a gentle but firm hold. "Keep your weight off that leg," he tells Izuku. "Lean on me." Izuku agrees, just barely refraining from burrowing into Todoroki's side. He hasn't lost that much blood compared to Iida, but he still feels a little cold, and the heat of Todoroki's left side is almost heavenly. They're still going to have to pull out that blade embedded in his leg later, but for now this is more than enough. The two turn to find Iida in a deep bow. "Both of you were wounded because of me. I'm so sorry I was so blind. You trusted me, Midoriya, and I let you down." Tears splatter on the ground. "No," Izuku says. "I'm sorry too. I promised I'd be there, but I couldn't understand you. I was too late and I even hurt you." Something bitter that tastes like regret and self-loathing wells in the back of Izuku's throat. He can't bring himself to look directly at the ugly mess of burns at Iida's throat. He only prays that the doctors will be able to fix it up properly, because if not... "You weren't late," Izuku hears Iida break his thoughts with his voice. The boy lifts his head, his teary eyes drilling into Izuku's. "I'm sorry for what I said, Midoriya. It's not true when I said that I didn't want you here. You still came for me, and you saved me. You both did." Todoroki squeezes the arm around Izuku's waist, as if to encourage him. Izuku smiles at his friends. He still feels slightly sick at the familiar smell of burnt flesh, but he won't apologize anymore. And he won't let Iida either. Izuku had been terrified for the lives of both of his friends, but now they're all safe. That's what he focuses on. He takes a deep, steadying breath, then nods decisively. Thanks. Now let's all stop apologizing. I'm alive, you're alive, Todoroki's alive. We're good. Tomorrow we're going to wake up together and sneak out of the hospital to go get ice cream, and it's going to be a great day. He dares the world to say otherwise. But life isn't fair, and it certainly isn't kind. Just as all their problems seem to be solved, an urgent shout rings through the air. Get down! Gran Torino yells. Izuku whips his head around to find a Nomu with wings flying towards them. His mind is in overdrive. The Nomu is missing an eye, so its aim might be off, but considering the path, Izuku shoves Todoroki away from him the same moment that the Nomu clasps a taloned foot around his waist. Then it takes off again in the air in a flash, far too high for even Gran Torino to reach. Midoriya! Todoroki's desperate scream echoes after them. The ground is a flurry of panicked movement when the Nomu suddenly shudders and starts falling to the ground with a screech. Oh shit, Izuku thinks as he tries to brace himself for the fall, his body tired and sluggish even in the face of imminent death. But before he can do anything, a dark shadow grabs him and finishes off the Nomu by embedding a familiar knife in an exposed brain. The man hits the ground with a thud, but sets Izuku down gently. Both this sham-filled society and criminals who just wield their power are targets of my purge, Stain pants. All for the sake of a better society. Even as Endeavor barrels into the scene, the hero killer doesn't back off. If anything, his vigor seems to only grow as he takes a step after step towards the heroes. Fake, he spits with contempt at his Endeavor. Someone must fix it. Someone must bathe in the blood to reclaim the true meaning of hero. Come, you fakes. Everyone is frozen at the sheer weight of Stain's conviction as it presses down on them, nausea clawing at their stomachs, fear crawling down their spine, horror choking their throats, and despair rooting their feet. Everyone except Izuku. Because, you see, Izuku knows fear like the back of his hands. He's worn despair like the scars on his back. He's stood face to face with terror and horror time and time again. And while Izuku can't get used to the fear for someone else, he is used to the fear of someone. So when everyone, his friends, the pros, even Gran Torino and Endeavor, is frozen, in the face of Stain's pure, unadulterated wrath, Izuku isn't. He does what he's always done. He steps between them. The only one who can kill me is a true hero, All Might, Stain shouts. But before he can take another step closer to the heroes, Izuku pulls himself in front of the villain. He can't run. The tip of his blade, still piercing his leg, scrapes the concrete ground as he skids with his pull, but Izuku pays it no mind as he pivots to position himself between the hero killer and everyone else. He faces the hero killer in a defensive crouch. He flings both his arms to either side to shield everyone else, and his fire subconsciously bursts out at the back like a pair of wings, flaring out to shroud the others from Stain's sight. Stain pauses. His unfocused eyes stare directly at Izuku, and his deformed face breaks into a mad, mad grin. And you. Is something on your mind? Are you bothered by what the police said? Izuku jolts out of his thoughts as Todoroki sits down on his hospital bed. It's the day after they met Stain, and Izuku, Todoroki, and Iida have been piled into the same hospital room. Hosu's chief of police had come in earlier and made a deal with the three, saying that they won't be punished for acting without a hero license if they agree to keep their mouths shut and let Endeavor take the credit for catching Stain. Todoroki initially raged against the accusing words, but eventually it turned out all right. Right now, the adults had left, and Iida has gone out for the moment to get treatment on his left arm and his throat, so it's only the two of them in the hospital room. No, Izuku reassures him. It's just I've been thinking about what Stain said. Todoroki raises his eyebrows. He said a lot of things, most of which were bullshit, and you shouldn't let them bother you. Izuku startles at his uncharacteristic swearing, then huffs out a breath of laughter, but he still doesn't open his mouth. Todoroki's eyes soften. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, he says, but Izuku shakes his head. No, it's just, I don't want to dump my baggage on you. Todoroki snorts. Isn't that exactly what I did to you at the sports festival? I'd say you're a little entitled. Izuku grins back. Fair enough. He still doesn't say anything for a while, Instead of rushing him, Todoroki shifts so that his thigh is pressing against Izuku's in a comforting gesture. Izuku takes in a breath at Todoroki's wordless support and steels himself. Remember how Stain said that I don't understand revenge? Todoroki stills. Izuku recalls how earlier, when Iida had apologized to Manuel, the hero had given him an exasperated but fond smile with the words, "I understand how you must have felt, but don't do it again." Even Manuel, who had known Iida for barely 3 days, had understood Iida better than Izuku, who is supposed to be his friend. "I don't," Izuku said bitterly. "He's right, and I don't. I don't understand it. But he's wrong, that it's because I'm selfless. It's because I'm weak. Life isn't fair, and it certainly isn't kind. And just like it hasn't been to Izuku, life hasn't been fair or kind to Iida or Todoroki either. Stain had hurt someone Iida cares for. Iida Tenya's older brother Tensei had been his hero, and Stain took that away from them both. So Iida swore revenge and stalked the streets of Hosu for a chance to kill the hero killer himself. Endeavor hurt Todoroki first, but it was probably the fact that he hurt his mother that made him snap. Todoroki's mother was the one person he could turn to, and Endeavor made her push Todoroki away and even ripped them apart from each other. So Todoroki swore revenge and refused to use the fire part of his quirk to rub it in Endeavor's face. Hisashi hurt Inko so much, and when Izuku interfered, he hurt Izuku even more. But the thing is, all Izuku ever wanted was for Hisashi to stop. He had never thought about revenge, not when Hisashi beat Inko, not when he switched to beat Izuku, not even after he got arrested. The thought of retaliation or vengeance had never even once crossed his mind. To Izuku, Hisashi was like a force of nature, a natural disaster. If a tornado wrecks your home, you don't shake your fist and try to get back at it. You just weather it and bear it as best as you can while you wait for it to pass. Then you pick up the pieces once it's left. And being too used to Hisashi, even with Bakugo, hell, even with Shigaraki, Izuku had never felt anything approaching being truly vindictive. Seeing the villain order the Nomu to break Aizawa had made him snap, but even then Izuku had avoided directly aiming his fire at Shigaraki. So Stain is right. Izuku has never felt vengeance. He doesn't understand it. That disconnect is why Izuku hadn't been able to follow Iida's thought process. It's why he hadn't been able to immediately guess where Iida might be and look for him right away. It's why he was too late to save him. Horror had filled Izuku at this realization. Not only had he been too weak to save his mother, but because of his weakness he couldn't save Iida either. His hands shake as he bites the bottom of his lip. His voice breaks. I never once thought about fighting against my father. Stepping between him and my mother, yes. Standing up to him, yes. But not fighting him, and certainly not taking revenge on him. Stain said that's because I'm too selfless, but no, it's because I'm too weak to even think of opposing my father. Izuku's hands crumple his sheets as they tremble. I always knew that I was too weak, that I was never enough, but this just proves it. A shudder goes through him as a cruel laugh rings in his ears, and a touch goes across his scars. But the cold phantom is banished when Todoroki clasps his hands gently but firmly over both of Izuku's clenched fists, leaning over Izuku so that their foreheads are almost touching, and Izuku is forced to meet his eyes. No, he counters firmly. You're right about a lot of things, but not on this. You didn't think of revenge because you're the type of person that thinks about saving people, not harming them. Take it from someone who's been consumed by revenge. You're not weak. You are kind. And you... Todoroki's voice almost breaks as it turns to a whisper. You were more than I deserved. Todoroki and Izuku are looking at each other with wide eyes. There's fiery compassion and ice-hard conviction in those mismatched eyes that he sees, and Izuku feels his fists ease despite himself. That reminds me, Todoroki says, a small crease forming in between his brows. I know it's who you are, but don't do that again. Do what? Izuku repeats almost dazedly at the seemingly sudden turn of the conversation. Push me away, Todoroki clarifies. Put yourself in harm's way for me. You made those knives fly to hit you instead, and you pushed me away when that Nomu came for you. Then, to top it all off, you stepped between us when Stain got up again. Don't do that. Todoroki squeezes Izuku's hand hard as if trying to say, I mean it, though his hold is firm without ever saying or nearing the point of being painful. And while his tone is gentle, there is a spark of hardness in Todoroki's voice, something that burns in his mismatched eyes, and Izuku watches mesmerized for a moment before he snorts. "What?" "It's just," Izuku chuckles, "I have this theory, see, that a person's quirk and personality reflect each other, and you always seem so cool, but in moments like this when you shouted or yelling at the head of police who had the head of a dog, you reminded me that even if half of you is ice, the other half of you is fire." "Huh," Todoroki says, and now his eyes are softer, the corner of his lips drawing up in that way that almost is imperceptible to others but somehow is clear as day to Izuku. "Well, if that's the case, then it would explain a lot. It's obvious what kind of person you are, after all." "Me?" Izuku blinks incredulously. "You," Todoroki confirms, with a small nod and a smile playing at his lips. He taps a finger against the back of Izuku's hand as he counts off his quirks. "Selective gravity, fire, and super strength." Todoroki looks straight into Izuku's eyes. "You're a star." There's something decided and absolute in the way that Todoroki says those words, an unshaken conviction that takes Izuku's breath away. After all this time cursing his own quirk, Todoroki is saying that all the parts of Izuku that has made him into something that is brilliant as a star. And that's not all, Todoroki continues. Everyone can't help but be drawn to you and orbit around you. And stars like that. Izuku's breath catches as he clues into what Todoroki means. He recalls all the dreams he'd had of burning his wings for daring to have reached for the sun. But he sees his eyes soften as he smiles at Izuku and whispers the words that sound like hope. "We call them suns." "Oh my God," Izuku groans in exasperation. "Do we have to?" "You're the one that said that we're going to sneak out of the hospital and get ice cream," Iida points out reasonably. "Yes, but do we have to do that with me hanging off Todoroki's back like a koala?" "Your leg is still too wounded to walk. My arms are too wounded to hold you up, so Todoroki is giving you a piggyback ride. It's the only logical option," Iida points out again, reasonably, again. "Don't worry," Todoroki quips with a straight face. "I won't let you down." "Oh my God, not you too!" Izuku almost moans at the repeated joke as he evidently is starting to obediently climb onto Todoroki's back. Due to his position, he isn't able to see the conspiring grins shared between Todoroki and Iida. The next day, their escapade makes the news. The photo in the papers shows Izuku piggybacked on Todoroki's back and an ice cream and cone in each hand. He's holding the vanilla-flavored cone to his own mouth and the other to Todoroki's. Todoroki's eyes are slightly crossed, valiantly trying to lick the mint chocolate-flavored ice cream that's 2 centimeters too far away, even as he carries Izuku with ease. Iida is gesturing enthusiastically while holding up his own strawberry ice cream like a torch, all 3 of them covered in bandages, casts, and gauze, but all 3 of them smiling happily. This concludes Chapter 11 of Burn Your Wings. I love this chapter so much. I think they did a really great job with this one. I'll be back with the next chapter for you guys, and as always, thank you so much for listening.